Undercover boss orders breakfast inside a hotel lounge, freezes as waitress says she sleeps in her car. Did you sleep in your car last night? Yeah, but please don't tell anyone. I'm still waiting on my dorm paperwork to be approved. The whisper was so soft, barely louder than a breath lost among the clinking of cutlery and the soft jazz playing through the hotel lounge speakers. But to Michael Foster, it rang out like an alarm bell in a space designed to be perfect. His silver spoon froze midair. He lowered his head slightly, pretending to focus on the runny yolk on his plate, but his ears were wide open, catching every syllable of what had just been said behind him. No one else noticed. The guests nearby were still scrolling their phones, sipping espresso or chatting about investment plans. But Michael wasn't. The Briarstone Hotel lounge, where everything from the napkins to the morning piano notes was engineered to feel upscale. Pristine white marble floors, velvet chairs in caramel tones, monochrome canvas art on the walls. A space straight out of an interior design magazine. In the farthest corner, the table for solo breakfast diners. And today, it belonged to Michael Foster, 50 years old. In the guise of a businessman on a work trip, laptop open, quietly ordering the breakfast special, the very item provided by his own brand. To the untrained eye, he was just another quiet guest. But behind that crisp button-down and wire-frame glasses was a mind spinning like a fine-tuned machine, analyzing every word, every glance, every silence in the staff's conversations. Who was the girl who just whispered? Michael glanced over. Lena, the name printed on the tiny tag pinned to her apron. She looked about 30, petite frame, shoulder-length brown hair, pale skin under the amber-tinted lights. She didn't stand out from any other four-star hotel lounge server unless you looked into her eyes, slightly red, sleepless. And in her voice, even in that whisper, there was unmistakable pain. I'm still waiting on my dorm approval. Something was clearly wrong. Michael leaned gently back into his chair. He brought his espresso to his lips but didn't drink. This wasn't the first time he'd posed as a customer to check on site operations at vendors partnered with New Dawn Caf. But it was the first time he'd heard of an employee sleeping in her car, then standing here smiling and pouring coffee for strangers at 7 a.m.
And doubts began to form inside him.
Why did she have to sleep in her car? Could Briarstone really be so poor at supporting their staff it wasn't about the perfect pancake anymore? Or whether the espresso truly had Arabica notes. It was about a crack in the very system he had signed off on, one that might be quietly breaking real people. Michael started watching more closely. Lena, every time she bent to clear a table, her eyes scanned the room first.
Sometimes she tugged at her pant leg discreetly afterward.
Sometimes she fixed her hair quickly behind the counter as if trying to maintain an obligatory neatness even as she held herself together. Then, when a customer at the next table handed her a tip directly, Michael saw it clearly. She smiled faintly, then immediately turned to place the bill into the communal wooden tray without keeping a cent. Before doing so, she glanced toward the inner lounge, where a man stood leaning casually against the service bar like a watchful guard. That was Bryce, the floor supervisor. Michael recognized him from the HR file he'd reviewed 3 months ago, a man once praised for being highly efficient in lounge staff management. But the way he watched Lena didn't feel like supervision. It felt like control through fear. Michael took a sip of espresso, now cold. He pulled out his phone and opened the internal admin app of the New Dawn system. Not to check revenue, but to revisit the original partnership email with the Briarstone branch. Right there in the email, he reread a line he himself had written: "We don't just serve quality coffee. We serve respect." And he knew if Lena's story was true, that very statement was being betrayed here. In front of him sat a carefully folded napkin, but inside him, another kind of fabric was beginning to unravel. Layer by layer, every crease, every hidden secret. And he would follow each fold to the end. The Briarstone Lounge, luxurious but not loud. A space designed to make you feel as though the outside world no longer existed. High ceilings with muted crystal chandeliers spilling warm light over smoke-gray granite tabletops. Black marble floors polished to a mirrored sheen. Earth-toned leather chairs, soft and sturdy. Every detail was calculated not just to satisfy guests, but to keep them silent, seated, and convinced that everything here was just right. A soft, instrumental jazz tune played from hidden speakers. The clink of porcelain cups on glass saucers. The faint swish of leather shoes on marble. All of it merged into a morning symphony, serene, expensive, and artificial. Just behind the counter, however, was another world. No music. No ambient lighting. Only the smell of burnt espresso, the growl of dishwashers, and hurried footsteps that never seemed to stop. Michael Foster sat near the service counter, positioned to observe most of the staff area inside. He didn't need to stand or secretly record anything. He just needed to listen and observe. Because in places like Briarstone, injustice didn't show itself plainly, it hid behind smiles and polished service. Lena reappeared with a tray of dishes in hand. She looked about 27, tall and slim, naturally dark skin, lightly curled hair pulled back into a tidy bun. Apron properly tied, name tag slightly askew to the left. She moved quickly but not frantically. Every gesture was precise. Her smile measured, not overly warm, not cold either. Michael studied her eyes.
Slightly swollen.
Tired, but not defeated. The kind of eyes that had seen many long nights and still chose to show up the next morning. As she passed by a diner, whispered to their companion, "She seems nice. But I heard she got moved off night shifts just because she wouldn't share tips." Michael made a mental note, refused to share tips. Does that mean others do? A few steps behind Lena was Bryce, the shift supervisor. Around 45, crisp white shirt, navy blue tie, always nodded to regulation. His demeanor nothing overt, but his eyes swept constantly like a security scanner. Every time Lena bent down to wipe a table, Bryce watched her with scrutiny, not support.
"Still waiting on payroll, hang tight. We're short-staffed this week, don't bring it up again."
His voice was low enough not to disturb guests, but loud enough that Lena had to nod without asking further. It wasn't the first time Lena had heard that line. Michael could tell from the way she nodded too quickly. Table 9 by the window, Mr. Matthews, a regular. Silver hair, ash-gray suit, gold-rimmed glasses, flipping through the Wall Street Journal with one hand flat white in the other. He didn't need to place an order, the staff already knew his preferences. Matthews glanced at Lena as she poured water for the next table, then spoke quietly to Michael, as if they were long-time acquaintances. "That girl doesn't belong here. But seems like this is the only place that would take her for 2 shifts. And you know how it is for people struggling to stay afloat. They go wherever someone will hire them." Michael didn't respond. Just curled his lips slightly, part sigh, part silent confirmation of what he already suspected. The first red flag appeared. Lena bent under the counter to grab napkins. But before she stood up, she quickly counted a few small bills, then stuffed them into the inner pocket of her apron. Her eyes darted around. No one saw except Bryce, who turned back right at that moment. She stood up quickly and shifted immediately to pouring coffee. Face composed. But Michael clearly saw her hand trembled. Bryce stepped up, looked at the wooden tip tray, then looked at Lena. Nothing was said, but clearly something unspoken passed between them. A young guest, white dress shirt, conference badge, pulled out a $5 bill, trying to hand it to Lena directly.
She hesitated for a moment.
"Oh, that's all right, sir. I'll just put it in the tray."
Her voice was dry and steady, like someone reciting a script by heart. Bryce stepped in from behind and added, "Sir, please place tips here so the system can process them correctly." "Oh, I see." The guest hesitated, then placed the money into the wooden tray on the counter. Michael leaned slightly to look inside. There was no one processing anything. At this hour, the counter only had one supervisor, Bryce. Michael opened his small notebook and jotted down a line: tips pooled. Lena avoids. Bryce controls. Staff likely not allowed to keep their share. And then he paused. Not because he lacked evidence, but because there was something eerily familiar in Lena's eyes. It reminded him of someone from the early days of his business, a frail barista, always walking back to her dorm, never complaining until the day he found out she had to choose between dinner and doing laundry. Lena was living that memory all over again, and this time Michael wouldn't let it go ignored. Michael placed his napkin on the plate and stood intending to step into the hallway and make a call. But as he passed the next table, he stopped. Lena's voice, soft and small, like she feared pity, slipped through the clinking of cups and cutlery. Guess I'll skip lunch again. Gotta save gas till the weekend. Michael turned his head, not out of curiosity.
But because his heart had just clenched.
No one should have to say something like that while pouring coffee for guests in a 4-star hotel. Inside Michael's mind, numbers flashed by like a stock ticker. Last quarter's profits. Revenue reports from Briarstone. Beverage contracts between New Dawn and the hotel. He once called it the perfect model blending experience and efficiency. But now, someone within that system was skipping meals to survive. He returned to his table,
But he didn't sit down.
His eyes stared at the half-finished espresso. The steam still lingered. Everything around him continued as usual, but something inside him had just fractured. Michael quietly pulled a notebook from his inner jacket pocket. He wrote down word for word, still have to save gas till the weekend. Lena. And beneath that, does the hotel contract mention overnight shifts or tips distributed transparently? A janitor about 50 slightly hunched name tag reading Marcos paused his mop as Michael walked by. He spoke softly without making eye contact. Miss Lena's asked for night shifts many times, but the supervisor always denies her. Said, they don't want temporary people after 9 p.m. Michael froze. Temporary people. Lena was working double shifts. Every day. No breaks. He asked gently. She's not under a formal contract yet. Marco stayed silent, then simply said she sleeps in her car. They know, but no one wants to get involved. Michael nodded slightly, thanking him. His steps felt heavier as he returned to his table.
At the bar, a young bartender was polishing a glass.
Michael walked over, pretending to ask about a mocktail. When it was served, he asked, is it good working here? The young man gave a slight smile. Guess it's okay if you're strong enough. Around here, if you can't handle the pressure, you leave on your own. No one rescues anyone. Michael furrowed his brow. You mean vulnerable staff just get pushed out? Scene shrugged. No one says that, but, it's that uniform and silence culture. And, hey, if you're asking questions, just don't let Bryce know. Michael thanked him, took the glass, and walked away, but his mind was spinning. Uniform and silence. That phrase echoed in his head like a coded warning. Back in the dining area, Michael saw Lena standing at a table near the window. Morning light streamed through the glass, casting across her face. She poured water for an elderly couple, gently placing the napkin into the old woman's hands. They smiled at her. She bowed politely, and when she looked up, the smile was still there. But beads of sweat glistened at her temples. And her eyes were glistening too, not from emotion, but exhaustion. Michael recognized that look. It was the look of someone pretending to be fine just to keep the job. The entire lounge seemed to fade behind that image. The music, the lighting, the scent of coffee, everything suddenly felt eerily fake. Michael wrote another line in his notebook, pushing through not out of pride, but fear of losing the next meal. At a nearby table, a guest was on the phone. Michael accidentally caught a snippet. Yeah, that waitress heard she's sleeping in her car, still waiting on dorm approval. But still shows up every day. Honestly, that's impressive. The words weren't meant to criticize, but the casual tone in how they were said sent a chill down Michael's spine. Why was that considered normal? Why was sleeping in a car and working 2 shifts a day seen as admirable instead of a warning sign that the system was broken? At the table to his left, Michael noticed a small detail. A tip receipt had been crumpled and left behind. Lena stepped over, carefully picked it up.
She smoothed the wrinkled paper, glanced at the amount, $2.
She said nothing, didn't complain.
She just gently tucked it into the inner pocket of her apron and walked away.
Michael suddenly recalled a line from an old recruitment campaign he once launched. We believe everyone in service deserves to live off their own labor. He truly believed that then. Now he wasn't sure his system still kept that promise. He checked his watch. It was nearly 9:30 a.m. Part of him wanted to get up, walk out, and return to his office to issue directives. But another part, the deeper part, knew no office has the power to witness the truth unless it sits right here among those wiping tables with trembling hands. Michael leaned back slightly in the leather chair near the lounge's large window, but his mind wasn't relaxed. He couldn't taste the coffee anymore. He couldn't hear the jazz playing from the hidden ceiling speakers. He could only see Lena's eyes as she spoke about sleeping in her car.
And all the fragmented whispers he'd heard throughout the morning.
Enough. It was time to act. He removed his thin-rimmed glasses, walked slowly to the bar where a janitorial staff member was wiping the coffee machine. With a friendly tone, he spoke as if he were just a passing customer. "How are tips divided here, young man? I see a tip tray, but no one seems to touch it." The staff member name tag read Marcus paused slightly. His hand kept wiping, but his eyes darted toward the back room where Bryce had just entered the manager's office. He replied quietly, almost in a whisper. Usually Bryce collects it at the end of each shift. Says the company will redistribute it later. Michael gave a slight smile, waited a moment, then asked, "And have you ever actually received any?" Marcus shook his head awkwardly. "I've been here 3 months, haven't seen anyone get any." Michael nodded, as if it was a casual story, but deep inside, he knew this wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was a system rotting from the inside. He moved to the next table, where a young waitress was replacing the tablecloth. Michael continued his gentle inquiry. "That curly-haired girl, Lena, right? She's very attentive." The girl name tag read Ashley nodded quickly, but then spoke softly, her voice slightly shaky. "She's amazing. Works 2 shifts every day and still smiles." But she hesitated. "But what?" Michael asked. "She once accepted a direct tip." Bryce yelled at her in the middle of the floor. Since then, everyone's afraid. Ashley quickly lowered her head and returned to work, clearly not wanting more attention. Michael didn't ask further. He had all the clues he needed to see the truth. Near the end of the morning, as the crowd began to thin out, Lena walked toward the staff corner, a quiet break area with a charcoal gray bench and a round table holding a water dispenser. She carried a gray envelope, a payslip printed on cheap paper. She opened it. Only $178 after deductions for a full week of 5 shifts, each 7 hours long. Lena's face showed no emotion at first. She just stared at the number as if staring longer might somehow turn it into something else. But then her hands began to tremble. She sank into the seat. One hand still held the payslip. The other clenched the strap of her bag. And in that seemingly quiet moment, she curled into herself, pulled her knees up to her chest, and cried. No sound. Only her shoulders shook with the kind of sobbing that's been buried deep for too long. Michael stood a few meters away behind the frosted glass of the VIP lounge area. From where he was, he couldn't hear anything, but he saw everything. He saw that small figure curled up on the bench like a child hiding from the world. He saw the sunlight streaming through the window, reflecting off Lena's tangled brown hair, beautiful light, but cold. And he saw himself in the reflection on the glass, no longer the founder of a famous coffee chain. He was just a man witnessing his own failure come alive in the form of a 27-year-old girl who had to sleep in her car and skip lunch. Michael turned away, heart heavy. Lena had no idea she was being watched. She didn't know that the man silently standing just a few steps away was the CEO of New Dawn, the name printed on every coffee bag she brewed each day. But he knew. And that was what made it unforgivable. No more excuses about a large system. No more blaming just one rogue branch. No more pretending that as long as he didn't witness it, he could trust the polished reports on his desk each month. There was no loud noise, no plates crashing, no yelling. No one stood up and slammed a fist on the table. Yet in that moment, the air inside the Briarstone lounge seemed to stop breathing. Michael placed his espresso cup gently on the table. He dabbed the corner of his mouth with a napkin, a slow, composed motion if you didn't notice the slight tremble in his hand. He stood up, walked straight toward the bar, not in haste, not drawing attention. Just a well-dressed, middle-aged man approaching a floor supervisor. But each step he took sounded like the toll of a warning bell. Michael stopped directly in front of Bryce, the shift supervisor, fumbling with order slips. He didn't raise his voice, didn't call out a name. He simply rested one hand on the bar. The walnut surface gleamed, but his palm felt cold. "Excuse me," he said, voice even and low. I have a few questions. Bryce looked up, facing a man he assumed was a VIP guest. His professional smile snapped into place. Yes, sir. How can I assist you? Michael didn't respond right away. He glanced toward the brass tip tray sitting in the corner of the bar, quiet, untouched, like a useless piece of decor. Then his eyes returned to Bryce. Silent but heavy with intent. About the tips, he said. How they're divided. In that moment, every voice in the lounge seemed to lower. Even the sound of a spoon stirring a cappuccino at the next table fell silent. And Michael paused gently about what's really going on here. Bryce hesitated. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then quickly composed himself again, forcing a half smile tinted with confidence. There's been some misunderstanding, sir. We have a very clear system for handling tips here. Everything follows procedure. Perhaps you overheard a new staff member say something inaccurate. Michael tilted his head slightly. He didn't object. Didn't interrupt. But behind his thin glasses, his eyes never left the floor supervisor's face. Lena stood behind the counter. She was holding a water pitcher pouring into a glass when her hand froze. Water overflowed the rim. She didn't move. Her eyes locked onto the man who had just placed a hand on the counter and was asking the very questions she once wished someone would be brave enough to ask for her. Michael still hadn't removed his glasses. He didn't need to because the truth was already beginning to show clearly in every reaction. He turned slightly, looking toward Marcus, the janitor from earlier, standing quietly near the kitchen entrance. Marcus froze. Michael's gaze returned to Bryce.
Several staff said they've never seen tips come back.
He said slowly, each word weighted. And others said they were warned not to hand them directly to servers. Bryce tried to maintain his composure, but sweat had begun to darken the collar of his shirt. His hand moved to adjust his tie, a reflex of someone being closely watched. Michael looked directly at him. And the girl behind you, the one sleeping in her car, she doesn't even know if tip money will ever be enough to fill her tank so she can get home. The once spacious lounge suddenly felt too small for Bryce. He stammered that I look into that. It must have been a mistake. Michael raised his hand. Not loudly, but firmly. No need to explain, he said calmly. Only the truth. From a distance, a security staff member approached, handing Michael a tablet. He opened it, a few quick taps. On the screen, a clip from the bar's camera footage 3 days ago. It showed Bryce collecting money from the tip tray, slipping it into his inner jacket pocket. No checklist. No witnesses. No official procedure. Just a man using his small position of power to squeeze out every cent from people barely holding on. Lena was still behind the counter, her face pale, the water pitcher trembling in her grip. She didn't understand what was happening until Michael slowly took off his glasses and slipped them into the pocket of his shirt. In that instant, the entire room seemed to freeze. Marcus whispered softly, "Oh my God, it's him a minute past." No one spoke. No one touched their utensils. No one lifted their coffee cups. Everyone in the lounge could feel it. Something had just changed. Michael Foster was no longer just the well-dressed guest quietly enjoying breakfast. He was now the man holding the scales of justice for a system that had just let its weakest person fall. Bryce took a half step back, trying to recover you. You've misunderstood the situation. She sleeps in her car. Michael cut in, his voice light but sharp as a blade. Silence. And every morning she shows up on time. She smiles. She pours coffee. She clears tables. He pulled out a stack of printed images from his pocket clear camera footage, showing Bryce collecting tips and taking them to the back office without logging anything. This is the transparent process you mentioned. Bryce quickly raised his hands. Wait, I was just holding them to distribute at the end of the month. Michael placed another document on the counter, a company policy email with his own signature clearly stating tips must be distributed by shift same day and logged transparently with involved staff. A young server stepped forward from the back. His eyes were red. He looked at Lena, then turned to Michael. Sir, I once asked for the tip breakdown from last month. Bryce told me if I asked again, I'd be removed from the week's schedule. The whole lounge froze. Lena bit her lip. Her hands clenched the strap of her apron. She couldn't speak anymore. Michael turned to face the group of employees gathering near the counter. I'm Michael Foster, founder of New Dawn Cafe, and I'm the breakfast service partner for this hotel. A kitchen staff member almost dropped his tray. A female server covered her mouth. Bryce stood frozen like stone. Michael continued, no need to raise his voice. I built this system to sustain people, not for someone to collect every last tip and say I'll split it later. Michael asked the IT team to connect the lounge screen. The camera played footage of Bryce intercepting a tip from a regular customer, someone who tried to hand it directly to Lena, only to be pushed away and forced to drop it into the communal tray. A security staff confirmed all recordings had been archived and copies were sent to the corporate HR department. There was nothing left to say. Bryce could no longer deny it. Sweat soaked his shirt collar. The tie once meant to impress now looked like a noose. Lena quietly stepped back. She no longer looked at Bryce, no longer feared being fired. She was now just a young woman standing in a system where she once believed no one would stand for her. Michael turned to her. You asked for night shifts, didn't you? Lena nodded softly. Eyes red but firm.
To save gas, she whispered.
Morning traffic burns too much. Michael looked at Bryce one final time. You are suspended effective immediately. Michael turned to the entire staff. This branch will undergo a full audit. And starting today, all tips will be processed electronically and displayed publicly. Guests in the lounge began to applaud. Not for theatrics, but because justice, for once, arrived at the right time in the right place. Michael didn't need to say much more, because what he had done was already the answer. At this point, the viewers are likely fully immersed. They're not just watching a video. They've been on a journey from a whisper to a truth unveiled, from the eyes of a forgotten girl to the decisive action of a man who could no longer look away. Briarstone Hotel, 9:36 a.m. A space once silent and expensive, now echoed with a rare sound scattered applause, slowly growing like a silent thank you spoken through claps. Michael Foster stood at the center of the lounge. No more disguise. No more distance. His voice low but firm. Starting today, all tips at this branch and every franchise partner in the New Dawn system will be transferred directly into each employee's account at the end of every shift. He lifted his gaze across the room. No need for grand declarations. No more shared trays. No more verbal promises. No one will be hidden behind a vague pay slip ever again. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope. Inside, not cash, but an official employment contract signed by him offering Lena a full-time position with all benefits of the system and a flexible shift schedule. And something even smaller, but it left Lena breathless, a staff room card at the hotel valid for 2 months, so she wouldn't have to sleep in her car for even one more night. She looked at him, lips trembling. Thank you. Michael smiled gently, nodded. No need to thank me. This is the right thing to do. And you deserve it. Bryce, once the shift leader with his scrutinizing eyes, was escorted out by hotel HR. No objections. No dramatic scenes. Only the eyes of fellow staff following him as if watching an old chapter close. Lena left the counter not to go back to work, but to sit in a leather chair near the tall glass windows. The morning sun poured in, casting a soft golden glow across her hair. In her hands, no longer a wrinkled apron, but a new contract and a room keycard. Michael watched from afar, his eyes like those of a father finally untangling a knot in his own home. Another staff member walked over to Lena, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. We don't have to stay silent anymore. Michael turned back toward the POS system, now updating. On the small LED screen, REALATIMETIPTRACKINGVERIFIEDOPENFAIR. He turned to the senior manager of the Briarstone Hotel. I didn't come here to inspect the pastries. I came to see if people are still being treated like people.